Welcome to Photography Exposed. I'm Brian Palmer.
And I'm Christopher Stokes, and we talk a lot about trips on this show. And the biggest thing I want to talk about is specifically a really big trip I took, one to Italy. Now, of all places, Italy, you would think you want to bring a very nice camera like this one I always use, the D90. Well, this was a school trip, and I didn't really want to risk bringing my very expensive camera on a trip that I could possibly lose or get stolen. So really, I just brought along this little point-and-shoot camera, and a funny thing came about how I got this. It was actually given to me randomly by a stranger that I just met in a post office, and I always thought that was really, really cool.
Yeah, really. Can't beat that price.
Oh, free, come on.
And it takes good photos, though.
Yeah, the funny thing is, like, I always thought, like, bring this on, like, what kind of basically pictures can I pull out of it? And surprisingly enough, I got some really great pictures. I mean, I was all over Italy, and there's so much architecture and art, and getting the definition out of it, it literally, quite literally brought out really brought out the pictures basically I took.
Mm-hmm.
So this is just, it's just a very fun camera. It's called the Kodak Easy Share. Small, simple, not that expensive, and it was perfect to bring on any trip that you just may not want to bring like a very expensive camera on.
Yeah, the good thing about some of these smaller cameras is because the sensor is so tiny, I think we talked about this a little bit in the last episode, the lens doesn't necessarily have to be as big to perform better for that size camera. So this is probably like, a 10 or 12 times optical lens, which is probably a bigger range than something like this lens, which is at about a 5 times or 6 times zoom or something like that, just because it's got a bigger sensor. Yeah. So as long as you're in conditions where the sensor can perform well and it can get good pictures, it's a lot of space and weight to save, especially when you're traveling, internationally, where packing is, and like you had mentioned off the air about, being concerned about the security and pickpockets and things like that. Just having one less thing to worry about on a trip like that.
And also, when walking all around, if you have a big bag full of lenses, I mean, it's not always the best thing. You want to be, if you are bringing a camera like that, you got to be conservative with your lenses.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And so, speaking of lenses, we were talking about making selections for lenses, and one of the things that people often are asking me is, I just got, whatever camera. A friend of mine just got a T2i, and he wanted to know what lens should he get next. And, I think one of the things is, well, what do you plan to do with it? Because I just have a quick list here, and, of some Canon 70 to 200 or 70 to 300 millimeter lenses. Some of them are the Canon branded ones, some of them are third-party Sigma, Tamron lenses. And they range from $160 all the way up to $2,500, and they're essentially the same spec. And But
you always find the company lenses are a lot more expensive.
They do tend to be more expensive. I think a lot of times you get what you pay for when it comes to lenses, but what do you need? I mean, sometimes you're getting something that you're paying for, but you don't necessarily need all that you're getting and all you're paying for.
It's kind of the same thing with this. Like, you don't have to spend so much on that when you can get a good camera like this and still get really good shots.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so in this case, the biggest differences are the quality of the glass and the apertures and some of the features like the focus, hypersonic focus and stabilization and different features like that. And they run all the way from, like I said, $160, which is relatively cheap, almost like a throwaway lens if you have to go someplace where you might be a little bit worried about it getting damaged, up to $2,500, which is definitely not a throwaway lens.
2 D90 bodies.
Exactly, basically. Yeah. So so I just took a trip this past weekend, 4-day weekend, to with a friend of mine to Pittsburgh and to Cleveland, just to do to do a little shooting. And I rented a Canon a TSE 24 millimeter tilt shift lens, and I got it through, I think it was rentglass.com. It was I think it was about $67 or $70 for the lens and the shipping and everything, which
normally a very expensive lens.
Yeah, I think this, and I forget exactly, but I think it was something about like a $1,500 or so lens to buy the new version of it, and this is an older model, I believe. But it kind of sparked the idea also of specialty lenses like this. Buying a lens where it's definitely like a specialty kind of lens. Some special lenses like macros or the tilt shift lens is a great example. Sometimes also, like if you're doing some wildlife or sports shooting where you need to have like a really long lens, like 400, 600 millimeter, and have it be fast, where it's going to be f4 or something like that, you're going to spend upwards of $10,000 or $15,000 for some of these big lenses like this. And
there's so many different lenses for every different kind of shot you want to get in.
It's hard to justify.
The price goes. The price. There's a lot of money goes into that.
Exactly, and if you're using it all the time, if you're shooting sports all the time, and you need that kind of a lens, if you keep on renting it, you're going to pay for it. Not too long. But for something like this tilt shift lens, where I had never even used something like that, I wanted to kind of try it out and see, you know, what how it worked and what it might be useful for, and which gave me the opportunity to shoot a little video, which we'll include now, that talks a little bit about the differences between something like a tilt-shift lens and something like a Lensbaby, which is a different kind of you know, variable focal plane lens where you can, you know, you can shift the focal plane. And so check out this video and I'll tell you a little about that.
I'm going to demonstrate the difference between using a standard lens and a tilt-shift lens. So both of these lenses have the capability of shooting at 24mm, but when you're shooting something like a building where you've got vertical lines or these light poles, and they should appear to be vertical, if you're shooting straight out at them, they will appear vertical. But typically, to frame these kinds of things, you have to aim up just a little bit. So what ends up happening is you get this parallax that occurs, where the tops of the buildings appear to be tipping in slightly. And so the way you can correct for that is to use a tilt-shift lens. So I've got my 24 to 70mm lens on this camera now, and I'm going to go all the way out to 24mm so that way I can match the tilt-shift lens, so that way they have the same framing, and I'll show you the difference between the two. So I'll go ahead and put the live view on.
If you're looking through the camera, you'll see as I start to tip the camera up, the light poles seem like they tip into the center. And as I go down, you can see that now they're actually tipping out a little bit. They're going off the screen, but you can see how they look like they're angling out. And that's that parallax effect that I was talking about. So architectural photographers don't want to have anything that's supposed to be vertical not looking vertical, because they're supposed to represent it just the way it is. So by using a tilt-shift lens, they can correct for this. So let me go ahead and swap lenses here.
And the first thing you'll notice, it does look a little different. It's got a couple of knobs on the sides. It's just, this is a prime lens, it's not a zoom lens. But you'll notice that it has this ability that it can shift side to side, and it can also tip up and down. And you can actually rotate the whole lens, so you can have the shift go side to side, or the shift go up and down, and the tilt go side to side now if you want as well. But what this let me do is,
when I tip this down, it keeps the lens more square to the front of this building, but the camera's still facing up, so the sensor is actually shooting up to be able to capture it all. And you can see if I tip the other direction, it kind of shows more extreme what, you know, the opposite of what's happening here. So you can see here how that tilt shift is just kind of in camera correcting for that distortion. And you could do things like this in Photoshop as well, but you're going to end up, you know, using pixels that you're going to extrapolate some, and you're going to have not quite the clarity that you could have if you did it in camera with the optics. So an interesting thing you could do as well is you can shift the lens side to side. And so now my lens is more square to the front of the building, even though I'm pointing over to the left-hand side. So it kind of gives the illusion that I'm facing more to the front of the building, and you can see how it's warping the image. This is actually not a correct way to do it, I suppose, but it gives you some ideas for what you might be able to do from a creative standpoint. You can kind of really push the building around a lot. And get some interesting variations on the way it's supposed to look.
So here's an example of how you can see tilt-shift lenses being used with a digital SLR shooting time lapses to give this miniaturized look. In this example, the focal plane is being shifted so that way the depth of field is really kind of shallow and oddly diagonal across the screen. And this shallow depth of field is something that you would see normally with macro video and macro photography. And because of that, using this lens sort of improperly gives the illusion that these are miniature models and not actually full-size landscape images.
So then you might wonder how something like a tilt-shift lens differs from a Lensbaby. They both have a flexible kind of front element that you can shift that focal plane, but they're typically used in real different ways. The tilt-shift lens is used intentionally. It's usually used as a correction tool to correct, you know, the visual parallax and things, where the Lensbaby is used more as just a creative tool. Although we've found a lot of people are using tilt-shift lenses as a creative tool because you can do some interesting things where you can shift the plane, and it kind of gives things a more of a, almost like a miniaturized look, and you've seen that a lot in photography and in time-lapse video as well, using digital SLRs. But let's see how the Lensbaby looks through the lens and how that compares to what we've seen with the tilt-shift lens through the lens.
Okay, the first thing you're going to notice is that the focal depth is different. This is a 50 millimeter Lensbaby, and so it does have a different framing. If you could ignore that, you'll see that it doesn't have quite the same control. You have your basic focus, but it's not really changing the perspective. Like, let's say, for example, as I move the lens around, the light pole doesn't really change. It doesn't warp. It doesn't change its shape and tilt in and out as much. It just kind of changes that focal plane. So you can see as I just kind of continue to move this around, you can get some creative focus with it, but it's not going to distort the image in the same way. So that's one big difference there.
One major difference with the Lensbabies compared to a tilt-shift lens is the way you control the aperture is actually not the way you typically do in camera with an aperture dial, but you actually use these aperture discs. But the way you put them in is you basically just take one of these aperture discs and drop it in, and it magnetically holds it in place. And then you use this tool that it comes with to lift it back out again. It's got a little magnet, and you can take it back out that way. So in the field, it's not necessarily the easiest way to work. It's not just dropping in a dial. You literally have to grab an aperture disc and drop it in place, and then see how your exposure changes. On some camera models, these lenses won't actually show you any information. They're not even showing you their metering. They almost feel like an old, an AIS lens on an Nikon body that doesn't give you any feedback. You have to basically look at the histogram and after you've taken a picture, see how that works out. Again, on the tilt-shift lens, you've got these added controls that you don't have on a regular lens. The ability to basically swing the lens side to side, and that is what takes that focal plane that is typically square to the front of the camera, and you can shift it off on an angle one way or the other. And then you can also take the lens and shift it up and down, which is what is correcting for the parallax when you're looking up or down at a building or something that should be looking square.
Yeah, the Lensbaby is always a great lens to use. It really sets up different kinds of shots. It's a really different specialty lens that you can use it for so many different purposes. But of course, it's better to rent cameras or rent lenses before you actually use them, because you don't want to spend tons of money on a lens and get it and it's just not your thing.
Especially if it's something specialty where you don't really know how you might use it, But yeah, interesting thing was the Lensbaby was thought of as more of like a creative lens, where the tilt shift was supposed to be more of something like a tool for architectural photographers, where it was more of a corrective thing. You want to correct in camera rather than worry about doing it after the fact in your post process. But now people are using it more as a creative tool sometimes as well. So it's interesting.
It's a really fun lens to play with. Mm-hmm. Definitely. So have you rented anything else, Brian?
Last fall, we rented a D3X body for a week for a photo shoot we did here at the college. And that's a nice way to do that as well, because I think it was something like $300 or $350 for the week. And it's an $8,000 body. So again, it's hard to justify something like that if you don't have some place and some way to really utilize its capability.
It's always a strange thing. You don't want to spend so much, and you just haven't had hands-on experience with it. But renting it, use it for a bit, use it for a photo shoot of some sort, and then you can get a feel of how the camera is and whether or not you would want to spend that money on it.
So that's all we have time for today. You can email us at photographyexposed@gmail.com. And also, if you are on Facebook, we'd appreciate it if you go ahead and like us there.
Just please like us.
Which will help get the word out to your friends who might be seeing that you're liking us. And then last thing is, if you wouldn't mind, if you're viewing this on YouTube, please go ahead and go to iTunes and subscribe to us there. It's going to help make sure that you continually get it, and it also helps with our numbers to help kind of get the word out to get everybody else to see us.
Spread the word, basically.
So, all right, that's all we have time for today. Thanks a lot for watching.
Yeah, see you next time.